The climax of 10 days of celebrations culminating in Eritrea's 20th independence anniversary. And for the country that not too long ago was welcomed as Africa's 52nd independent nation, the price of freedom has come at a high cost to both the nation and the people. For 30 years before independence, Eritrea was embroiled in a hard-fought, bitter war with its larger, more aggressive and more powerful neighbor to the south, Ethiopia, which itself had been supported, depending on which administration was ruling the country, by either the United States or the then Soviet Union during the dark days of the Cold War. Alamseged Tesfaye is one of Eritrea's most renowned historians. He was studying law in the United States when the war broke out and left everything to come home and fight alongside his people.
I came from the United States to fight for my country. So this deep sense of not only nationalism, but also this deep sense of a desire to right a wrong that was imposed on Eritrea was an Eritrean phenomenon that we grew up with.
Tiny Eritrea, with its strategic location on the Red Sea, with two important ports at Massawa and Assab, seemed an easy proxy in the race for world superiority. And to the average analyst and expert, a war with Ethiopia was a war it simply could not win. Tens of thousands died in the fighting. More than 1.5 million fled to Europe, the United States, and Asia. And the rest, less than 3 million in number, were left to take on these impossible odds. But the resilience of the Eritreans, small in number and lacking the firepower of its powerful neighbor, seemed to make up in skill and determination what they lacked in weaponry. And in the end, they humiliated the Ethiopians into defeat and eventual surrender.
Throughout the period of the armed struggle, no nation really came to the aid of Eritrea. I mean, no big power came to the aid of Eritrea. Everybody was supporting the other side. And therefore, this desire to become self-reliant is something that grew up out of a necessity that the Eritreans had to face during these 30 years of armed struggle.
Yeah.
So yes, this sense of independence that you see is a crop up. It was born out of this experience itself.
Yeah. Independence came soon after, on May 24th, 1991, and the world welcomed Africa's newest republic to the family of nations. But 20 years later, Eritrea and Eritreans continue to struggle for recognition from the same world that welcomed them. Led by this man, Isaias Afwerki, the former engineering student turned rebel leader turned president, the euphoria of independence quickly dissipated with the reality of the daunting task ahead of him. Mistrusted by the West and ignored by the East, Afwerki turned inward, instilling a sense of homemade pride that saw just about every Eritrean, young and old, being inducted into the country's workforce. It took some doing, but the country was actually beginning to look like it was starting to stand on its own 2 feet. And then, in 1998, in what many analysts described as a silly border dispute between Eritrea and Ethiopia, the two former enemies returned to a full-blown war that would last another 3 years and cost tens of thousands more lives. Not to mention a famine that destroyed entire villages and threatened to uproot generations. Again, the Eritreans used their fighting skills and never-say-die attitude, and again managed to humiliate the Ethiopians into defeat. At this point, the United Nations stepped in, proving the Eritreans were right all along, and forcing the Ethiopians to sign a peace deal, which they did reluctantly, while refusing to withdraw their fighters from the disputed border zone. 9 years later, the Ethiopian forces stubbornly refused to withdraw in direct violation of a United Nations recognized agreement, and the stubbornness has cost them dearly, not least of the fact that the landlocked country has no access to the sea except through Djibouti, a distance of close to 1,000 kilometers, as opposed to just 71 kilometers were they to use the port of Assab. Such is the stubbornness of two very similar yet different neighbors. 20 years later, as Eritreans mark this milestone, many know and realize they could have come a lot farther had there not been a series of missed opportunities made worse by what they call the inflexibility of the leaders on both sides of the border. But Eritreans can at least claim to be self-sufficient when it comes to food security, free education, and health care for all, and a dogged determination to do things for themselves their own way. All this at the expense of political freedoms, reforms, and other amenities enjoyed by many of Africa's 53 other independent states. Back at the National Stadium, it seems Eritreans are determined to do things their way, without being dictated to by outsiders. And maybe that's why their president can confidently jump into the crowd of celebrating youth without as much as a bodyguard in tow, and celebrate with his people his own way. And out in the streets, Eritreans continue to sing their own songs and dance to their own beat, because their hard-fought freedom, no matter the cost, is their freedom. The celebrations will no doubt continue late into the night, but a lot of people here know there's very little to celebrate here. And tomorrow morning, Eritreans will wake up to a massive hangover of lost dreams, lost hopes, lost ambitions, and lost opportunities. Jeff Koinange, K24 on Liberation Avenue in Asmara.